Most of us, perhaps all of us, have wondered about and even wrestled with questions about life. For example, origins. Where did we come from? Or meaning. Does life have a purpose, or do we live a meaningless life and die? Another is morality. Why should we live any particular way at all? Is there an objective morality, or do we make it up as we go? Destiny is another one. What happens after we die? Do we cease to exist when we breathe our last, or do we continue existing in some form, and if so, do we go somewhere? There are many religions and belief systems. What are the areas of agreement and disagreement? Welcome to our merry band at the Fellowship of the Book, as we ponder the big question.
And here we go with a big question.
Big question.
It's a big question, actually.
Mhm.
And we have our, I'd say fair-haired, but he's barely haired, I guess would be a better.
Fairly barely.
Description. Yes. I guess I gotta turn his mic on. He's gonna say bad things about me, but I guess that's
all
the
right.
way it goes.
We're used to it.
All right, mics are on. Mics are on. Everyone can't unmute your. Oh, I can't. Okay, so he's got his off. Jeff, your mic is off.
What?
And Ruth is off.
Not anymore.
And Don is good. We're all good.
Yeah, we're all good.
So
Okay.
back to Herr Honsberger.
Oh,
If you would start carrying the map to our destination, that would be good.
All right. Well, last week, before we were so rudely interrupted by technology, let's start off by just surveying the first time in our working through our outline with the important dates from the birth of Mohammed to the death of Mohammed in 630, 622, important date in the Muslim calendar, the Anu Hagira, where the Muslim community is forced to flee to Medina, where he becomes the head of the government and starts a series of wars and attacks against the Meccans and other different tribes. Kills a whole bunch of Jews, kills the wrong Jews at one point, puts one of the women in his kitchen who poisons him to death, and he dies in 632. Every textbook written in the Western world will say something like, after a short death, the prophet died. After a short illness, excuse me. They don't say why, because it's very embarrassing that the prophet was killed by a woman, one, because he's a man's man, he's a warrior's warrior. But even worse, that it was a Jewish woman. So again, to try to help people understand the animosity that goes way, way back in Islamic history, this is a huge component to it. It says also in 630, when he takes over the city of Mecca and he cleanses the Kaaba, that brown rectangular building. Every textbook in America will say, every world religions, because I taught that for so many years, will say he cleansed the Kaaba. What they didn't say is that he cleansed the Kaaba by killing hundreds of people that were in the Kaaba, surrounding the Kaaba, all these pagans and stuff that were worshiping many gods, including one that was in there, a moon god, a crescent moon god named Allah, that was one of the favorites of the Quraysh tribe itself. Okay. So important dates, 732, Muslims are stopped halfway. Battle of Badr, I should have said 624, very important in understanding Muslims' mindset about how with Allah's help we can take on even the Soviet Union, for example, or the United States or anybody else. 732, Muslims are stopped self-defending, according to my Muslim friend, themselves halfway across France after they've taken over the Holy Lands, taken over Persia, taken over North Africa, all of Spain, and they're stopped halfway across France. Or we'd be having a different conversation. And 1917 is very important because when Turkey, who had been on the side of the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians, when their side lost World War I, the Turks were finished as an empire. That was basically the end of the Ottoman. And their new president, Ataturk, declared that he's no longer... he's not going to be the new caliph, the new successor of Islam. The government was going to be atheistic. He's a Marxist, and we're done. That sends a shockwave because over 500 years of Muslim life, especially Sunnah, was seen as the caliph is in Istanbul with the head of the Turkish government, and that's now ended. In 1924, roughly to 1928, sort of somewhere in there, the Muslim Brotherhood is born as a response to this. The Muslim Brotherhood that President Obama loved. The Muslim Brotherhood has been the kind of the petri dish of organizing everything from ISIS to Al Qaeda to Hamas, Hezbollah, Abu Sayyaf, and so many other Muslim terrorist groups around the country, around the world, dedicated to the idea that we need to bring a caliph back and then return to the Dar al-Harb. So I remembered it this week. The House of the Sword. We need to return to that so we can bring all these non-believing countries, which is everybody but 57 countries in the world. We need to bring them all back into the House Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, where Sharia will be practiced around the world and Allah will be submitted to. 1948, also an important date. Obviously, Israel becomes a separate nation. Pakistan becomes separate at the same time. Almost 1 million people killed in India just on the split between India and Pakistan at that time. But worst of all things is that the Jews are now in charge of part of the Muslim world, at least as they see it, do part of the Muslim world. And I was talking to an imam in Kansas City many years ago. We had a conference with Dr. Jay Smith, which was really fun. He obliterated the Muslim imam representative. But one of the Muslim imams I was talking to was, well, what are you going to do? They came in and stole our land. And I'm like, well, first, how is it the Arabs had that part of the world? Just like how is it they had Egypt, or how did they have Andalusia, Spain? How did they have this? Did they get there because they walked in and everybody said, hey, come on in? No, that's not what happened. They conquered all the way across. And they're proud of that, in fact. But amongst the Western press, they will never admit that. And I'm basically like, okay, we'll give back Israel when you guys give back Istanbul to the Greeks and becomes Constantinople again, which was taken in 1453. Anyways, that's what Samuel Huntington from Harvard calls Islam is a long-standing history of bloody borders. Wherever there's a Muslim country next to a non-Muslim country, there's going to be a war. It's happened every single time in history. Okay, so there's some of the dates. There's so many more, but these are some of the bigger ones I picked out. Another quick survey, a brief theology of Islam, the Qur'an, the recitation. Amongst Muslims, the book is believed to be literal recitation of a heavenly book, the mother of all books, which is an internal fight amongst Muslims about whether the book is eternal, because only Allah is eternal. But they fight that amongst themselves. Anyways, the angel Gabriel is reading the heavenly book to the prophet who's in the cave. At first, he reacts, and freaks out, thinks he's hearing a jinn, an evil spirit that's attacking him. He's going into epileptic seizures type things, horrible stuff. And he's convinced by his wife it's not an evil spirit, but in fact, the angel Gabriel, just like in the biblical texts and stuff like this. So the Quran is this recitation of the book. We can talk about this theology for just a minute here. The interesting thing about it, much of the Quran reads contemporaneously. It is reading like you're walking in time. This is what was going on. This happened. The prophet heard this. He talked about this. It's reading in present tense at its day, and yet it's an eternal book. So this creates this interesting notion of Islam, of the predestination of literally everything. And the Muslim term for this is inshallah. It is written, or the will of Allah. It can be both. And basically the idea, everything happens. If I step off the curb and I get hit by a car, inshallah, that was the will of Allah that was written. If I step off the curb and I don't get hit by the car, inshallah, will of Allah that I don't get hit. So we are meat puppets who are merely fulfilling all the words of Allah in the eternal book. And most Muslims act like everybody else. They believe that they're freely choosing to do whatever. But this is what their serious thinkers will say. So the Quran is, in fact, very important. It's the recitation of the very words of God. If you're, on a practical note, if you're talking to Muslims, don't be doing what a lot of, old Southern fried evangelists did, standing on the word of God by standing on their Bibles. That will freak a Muslim out. He will go bonkers. And in fact, it needs to be, according to them, the highest book on your shelves, the highest book on your desk. It has to be, actually in a class many years ago, one of the schools I was teaching at, and I had a copy of the Hadith, the one I'm going to show you guys in a minute. I had a copy of the Hadith, the stories, just volume 1 of the Hadith on top of my Quran on my desk, because I was going to present them to the class. And this Muslim lady came up to me, oh, teacher, please, the Quran must be on top. So again, learn by doing, Bill. For a lot of Muslims, this is very sensitive stuff.
Hey, can I point something out?
Yes.
So I just want to say that a lot of times I'm hearing, things about their attitudes. And I have the same attitude about my God, you know, and I just didn't know.
You kill people because the book's not on top, James? Jeff, excuse me?
Now you're sounding like my buddy in Minnesota. I did not say that.
Good.
I did not say that. What I'm trying to say is that when I'm listening, sometimes it seems, just to give you some feedback, I don't know if you thought of this, that sometimes it seems that you're saying things about their beliefs and that I say, wow, I think that about my book, about my Bible, about, you know, so I just wanted to give that feedback. I don't know where it goes. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just wondering if you ever had somebody bring that up or something, but yeah, because it's like very similar. What a lot of the stuff they're doing, like we have a holy book. It's the book of God. They have a holy book that, you know. So anyway, I just had to say that. I don't know what.
So
Is it?
Well,
Go ahead.
just for clarification, Jeff,
Yeah.
it is true that they have their holy book and we have our holy book,
Right.
and we can then debate whether one is accurate, reliable, or not. But that's different than the treatment of the book they have,
An
which
attitude.
is you cannot lay something on top of the book,
Yep.
for example, because the book itself is not just the printed word of God, it is the holy book. So you might have to treat it as though it is God himself almost.
Right. And
yeah, I totally get that.
You can't
In my
clear your foot. There's so many restrictions about how you must.
yeah.
And it's similar to their mentality about Jeff, about prayer, about a billion other things, is that there's so many rules. And again, Sharia law depends on the culture and on the particular sheikhs in that culture and things like this, the traditions, the denominations, or fiqhs, as they call it. It's different everywhere you go. But one of the centralities to the book itself is that it must be treated better than any book that's ever been written. It's the most special book ever written. It's the most true book that's ever been written. And the true Arabic is, you don't even have to understand Arabic, and the words will just captivate you and take you into paradise type. That's the attitude you run into with a lot of folks.
Right.
It's interesting that, and I'll mention them at the end of the class, and it's somewhat on your further research. What Jay Smith and David Wood and Sam Schwinn and others have been doing about taking apart where the Quran comes from, how it was developed, is very different than the traditional Muslim narrative and how they present it here in the West. We'll talk about this later, but that's an important point. Okay, so here's the Quran. Again, just to remind everybody, this is the Arabic and English version given by the Saudi government. I got this years ago. Couldn't get it because I had my foot up in the air. That was a problem. But one thing that's important with English translation, Russian translation, Persian translation, Chinese, it doesn't matter. Only the Arabic is from Allah.
Matters, yeah.
The translation is not. So oftentimes when you catch them with a particular troubling verse in the Quran itself, you will hear, oh, that's just mistranslated. Well, I'm like, dude, it's your translation. But it's a kind of an interesting dodge. It's all part of taqiyya, or it's okay to lie to believers on how they deal with this. Okay, so the Quran is the recitation, the very words of Allah. Now, accompanying that is the hadiths, which are the stories. This is volume 1 of I think it's 8 or 9 volumes of Bukhari. I've got the rest at home. But Al-Bukhari is the most famous collection for Sunnah, not for Sharia. The Sunnah, the overwhelming majority, they hate the Shia hate them, they kill each other, have been for a long time. But what happens with this is about 150,000 statements, stories about what the Prophet did in this situation, what he did over in that village, or something like this. Many of those from Bukhari come from Aisha. Muslims have a standard of strong to weak. Bukhari says out of 800,000 roughly, I took the strongest 150,000. So generally, most Muslims will argue that Bukhari represents the actions and life of Muhammad more accurately than anybody else, which can be problematic because, for example, you read in Bukhari about how Muhammad, married his 6-year-old bride, Aisha, Abu Bakr's daughter. And he waited till she was 9 before he had sex with her, although he's doing all sorts of sexual acts too. That's in their literature. I'm not throwing rocks. But at 9, he waited to finally consummate sex with his wife. And the Muslims love Aisha, at least the Sunni do. The Shia hate Aisha. So their collection of stories is very different in a lot of ways. So again, you can't be assuming that talking to this Muslim that, oh, that means he's this. No, I always ask, oh, if you're Sunni, it's easy, it's Bukhari. But if you're Shia, like the Iranians are majority Shia, or if you're talking to Druze or Alawites, or you're talking to Ahmadiyya Muslims or whoever, you're going to get different versions of the story. Because there's 800,000 of these things floating around, and that's about
Lord.
800 or so AD that they said that there's that many stories. So depending on who you talk to, which stories they agree on, which stories they don't agree on, I don't like that story, off we go. So that's part of the confusion of the discussion, is that you're going to have to talk to them, ask them more questions. Exactly, what do you believe? Which copy of the hadiths, the stories, do you accept? That type of thing. But generally, most Muslims all accept some version of the hadiths. Because it helps them establish Sharia. Most of Muslim tradition and law is built into the Hadith more than the Quran itself, because it's the examples. Muhammad is the perfect man.
Right.
Whatever he said, whatever he did, is the direct will of Allah. I think we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, many Muslims do not believe that Muhammad even sinned because he was such a perfect example of the will of Allah.
Right.
And yet Muhammad himself, many times in the stories and in the Quran itself, will say, ask for Allah for forgiveness for his sins. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he actually said. It's the tradition that Muhammad is the perfect man that's most important. So when Muhammad, murders people, when Muhammad tortures people to find out where they hid their money, all these different stories that are in the Hadith, that is the will of Allah. When Muhammad had slaves, many black slaves, for example, when he had sex slaves from villages they conquered, that is the will of Allah as well. Whatever he did is an example for us to this day. There is a tiny, tiny minority of Muslims, and I've met an imam from India, told you guys about this, who think that all the stories are one-offs. That was for that moment, that was for that time, and doesn't have any, long-lasting results. But that's the tiny bunch. All the 4 major fiqhs or denominational, whatever you want to call them, of Sunnah tradition, all believe that everything that Muhammad did is the example for all time. So that's why we see activities going on today that are very similar. And all you have to do is listen. If you have a strong stomach and you can watch the English translations, listen to the videos that ISIS puts out and has been putting out for many years now, because their entire response is basically, we're doing it old school. We're going back and doing what Muhammad did himself. That's why we're killing these people in this particular way. Why we're gathering these women slaves in this particular way, the Yazidis and other people like this, because it's what Muhammad did. And to a Muslim, it's like, in the sense, back to the Bible effect in evangelical Christianity, back to the original stuff. Let's get back to the old school Islam. So welcome to the Hadith.
One more question. I got to ask it. It's real quick. So he lived a perfect life. We have Jesus, who lived a perfect life without sinning, but he died for our sins. But do the Muslims believe they're sinners? Did Muhammad, so they do believe they're sinners, and then they don't need a savior, though, right? Muhammad didn't die for, like Jesus, right? Died for their sins.
We're going to talk about paradise and hell later, Jeff, but that's an important point that we'll get to. Because what do they stand before Allah with is very important. That they stand before Allah naked, and we're going to do the hadiths here the pillars here in a second. So hang on to that one, Jeff. We'll get back to it. Okay.
Got it.
Okay. So the 5 pillars are the 5 obligations. This is the centerpiece of Islamic thought. Again, the second group, the Shia, have a slightly different list. Some of them are pillars, some of them have been changed, but nevertheless, it's important. And basically, it's what you must do. So if Islam is submission, a Muslim is one who submits. Okay, Islam does not mean peace. Islam means submission to the will of Allah. A Muslim is one who submits his will to the will of Allah. Part of why you put your head on the ground, and if you're really serious, dig your face into your carpet and stuff like this, is because you're showing by literally baring your neck that you are submissive to the will of Allah, even to the point of somebody killing you. All right, so in the pillars, the first one is Shahada. You basically say, but you must say it in Arabic. This is important. I'm going to rip on this later. you must say, there's only one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, his prophet. And you have to say it in Arabic. Once you say those words, just a simple statement in Arabic alone, then you are a true Muslim. According to Muslims. So that's the first one. Then there's the giving 2.5% of your income, the prayers, 3 to 5, depending which Muslim group you're a part of. There is the fast or the feast of Ramadan. Again, we're all surveying here. The fast or the feast for 1 month. You must not eat, drink, or have sex or anything physical like that in the daylight hours. But at nighttime, it's party time. So it's not a fast in the traditional Christian understanding or something like that. It's parties, a celebration with your family. Many Muslims will switch their schedules around so that they can, in fact, sleep during the day and go at it at night, having a great time. And there's traditional feasts that they have at the end and all this kind of fun stuff. So it's a very special time for Muslims. The last one is one of the most controversial ones in many ways because it sets up what I'm going to call, when we talk about the sixth pillar in a minute, and that is the Hajj. And the Hajj is a pilgrimage. Watch my language, every able-bodied Muslim man must make the Hajj once in his lifetime, but there's a ton of rules. What do I mean? You have to buy your ticket into the Hajj. You go there. There's a whole bunch of ceremonies. Now, interesting enough, the Hajj was in existence long before Muhammad. Mecca had been seen, or at least one city, maybe Mecca, had been seen as the center of pagan involvement. So it was a pagan ritual. You circle around the Kaaba 7 times counterclockwise. You have to work your way in and kiss the stone, which also existed prior to Muhammad. You have to go through rocks with the devil. There's all sorts of parts of this.
I like that part.
Yeah, well, part of the reason why the Iranians or why the Saudis and others are supporting the U.S. and Israel, which is ironic that they're supporting Israel, is that the Iranians have been saying for decades that they're going to wipe out the House of Saud. Why did they want to wipe out the House of Saud? Because the Saudis own Mecca, Medina. They control it, and they often will cut off the Shia from making pilgrimages. And so Shias have their own pilgrimages to different important places in Iran and Iraq. But still, the one to Mecca is the important one. Several rules that are important. You cannot borrow money. You have to have your own money. Another one, only able-bodied men have to go. But the Saudis allow in 3 million men a year right now. And according to the World Book or something like that, there's 1.8 billion Muslims. That would mean 900 million men must make the Hajj once in their lifetime. And only 3 million a year. We'll do the math. You can see how difficult this will be for most Muslims. Worse, rich Muslims will take more than one Hajj. I mean, if one Hajj makes Allah happy, more Hajjs surely will make Allah happy. And then even more worse, women sometimes take the Hajj. So all these people are taking up slots in the 3 million openings. That means other Muslims are not, allowed to get in. So it's a very, very complicated system. It's very difficult. If you're a poor, I use this illustration all the time. If you're just some poor beggar on the streets of Lebanon or something like this, and you're Shia, your chances of making the Hajj are next to non-existent. Okay, so you only have 5 things to do. This is really critical. This sets up the 6th pillar. You only have 5 things the law demands that you do. It's a short grocery list. Now you'll find all sorts of other extended grocery lists, just like you see in Catholic or Buddhist circles or something like this. 5 things the law wants. Some of them are easy, but here's this Hajj, and I'm in trouble. I can't do it. I don't have the money. I don't have the opportunity. All these different things come up, which sets us up for the 6th pillar. Okay, and the 6th pillar is basically the nickname for jihad. And jihad, Muslim apologists here in the U.S., that just means struggle, the struggle that a Muslim has about getting up for his prayers or something like this, which are a couple places in the Quran and Hadith where it talks that way. But the majority of verses, some in the Quran and a lot in the Hadith, is basically that jihad is warring against non-Muslims in the Dar al-Harb, the House of the Sword, in order to bring territory into the House of Islam, the Dar al-Islam. So this is very critical. Now, why is it critical when it comes to terms of salvation? Because you have to understand, if I cannot keep the 5 basic things, and maybe I've been known to have a beer or two, maybe I've chased the wrong skirt, maybe I've, slept in through the prayers, or I've just not been the best Muslim. And my time is short. And because Muslims have heard the earliest messages of Muhammad were centered on, at least initially, on how there's only one God. And he says this in the amongst gazillions of gods in the Quraysh people. And secondly, the judgment day is coming. So Muslims wear this part on their sleeve. Heaven and hell is so critical, or paradise and hell is so critical to them. And so I haven't been the best Muslim, and I know it. If you asked if I know I'm a sinner, do Muslims know? Yeah, it's a different grocery list for sure about the sins, but they know they've violated the laws and the traditions. So what do? How do I work my way out of this? Well, the sixth pillar comes along here. And I mentioned to you guys before the famous hadith where it says this: you may be a hair's breadth from hell. In other words, which is somewhat similar to the Christian understanding of hell. You've been the worst Muslim. You have not done any of the pillars, or only done part of the pillars, or you just know that you don't qualify. You may be a hair's breadth from from hell, but Allah sends you to paradise, inshallah. So it's literally this, you don't even know. Even if you're a bad Muslim, you might get sent to, to paradise, which is what they all want. And conversely, it says that you may be a hair's breadth from paradise. You're the greatest Muslim. You've done, 5 Hajjs. You've been, give so much more income. You do everything right. You don't even swallow your spit during Ramadan. And yet it says that Allah sent you to hell, inshallah. So this creates this level of instability inside the average Muslim's mind. I don't know. I can never know. And some of you that have talked to Catholics and then sometimes even evangelicals and others who don't know, the struggle people have with wondering, have I gone too far? Have I sinned too much? It's a common problem that human beings have.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, it's a huge problem because I want paradise. I do not want hell. It's written into my soul, as it were, by the culture, by the very opening verses and chapters inside, surahs inside the Qur'an itself. So what happens now is the sixth pillar. And here's the fun thing. Allah's a great deceiver. He's the greatest deceiver of all. Okay, that's what their scriptures say. Mohammed was a great deceiver. He's learning from Allah himself. But this is the one time Allah promises, pinky promise, that he will not violate his word. If you die in jihad, you give your life trying to fight the infidel. It could be, the kafir, the infidel, or it could be, Christians are kafir and Jews are kafir and Hindus and, Buddhists and pagans are especially kafir. Everybody is it's not a Muslim, is in fact in violation. In fact, according to many Muslim thinkers, they'll say, when you come to Islam, you revert, you come back to the true faith, because everybody's born a Muslim to them. And so when you become an atheist, Jew, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, you're already in violation, which means you're already subject to death. It's open territory here. Okay, well, anyways, in this case, Allah promises that if you die in jihad, you will gain instant paradise. So it doesn't matter how successful a Muslim you've been on the earth. It doesn't matter how poor a Muslim you've been on earth. You don't know. Because Allah. But if you die killing the infidel, and there's some old stories that go back on in not only the Muslim world, but there's a story prior to the First Crusade. One of the generals of the Christian West went to the Pope himself at the time, Pope Urban, and asked him, "Can we come up with a doctrine similar to the Muslims? Because they don't care about dying; they seem to want to die.
Yeah,
and it's hard to fight people who want to die." And of course, when Pope Urban calls for the First Crusade, hey, if you die like fighting the infidel, you'll gain heaven. You'll right through purgatory. Well, that sounds an awful lot like the Quran, and Hadith, not sound like the New Testament. But
how do they know that? How do they know that the great deceiver isn't deceiving them when he says that?
Well, that's the issue. That's the issue, Jeff. That's exactly what I was saying. Since he's got such a reputation for deceiving, they're worried, right? Because he might send them to hell, or he might send them to heaven without any warning at all, paradise. But this is the one time I promise, I'm not deceiving you. So it's a claim of faith, Jeff. At that point, and you're willing to die to get what it is you've always wanted, which is paradise itself.
Yeah.
Truly, I tell you, he says, truly, trust me this time, I tell you, truly.
I know.
Sounds like a 6-year-old child saying,
It's a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyways, really quickly, that's the pillars. Who is Allah? Allah, of course, according to Muslims, is the God of the Bible. He is the one God that created the universe. He is he's got 99 names. One of them is love. And wow, see, he's a God of love, just like you Christians believe. Of course, that's ignored in the rest of the Quran and the Hadith. anyways, Allah is seen as the one transcendent God who's so transcendent we can't know who he is really. Unlike Jewish and Christian circles where there's lots of talk about the nature of God, Muslims don't spend much time on that because what's important, he's shrouded in mystery, as it were, but what's important is he's revealed his will. And we follow the grocery list. All right. That's the mentality that they bring to the table, is that we don't going to worry about this other stuff. What we know is here's what he's told me to do. It's really simple. Just do the grocery list. I would argue that Allah was in fact not the God of the Bible. The moon god was never the God of the Bible. The moon god was Muhammad's dad, had Allah in his name. The moon god there's many pre-Islamic temples and other places that they have found with moon gods all over Arabia, or the Syrian Peninsula as it used to be called. This is long-standing that Allah was one of the hundreds, 360 plus gods in Mecca itself, and yet Muhammad took the main god of his tribe. I mentioned the Satanic Verses scandal. There's 3 daughters, Manat, Uzziah. I can't remember the other 2 daughters, but anyways, Manat is one of them. That are so beloved in the Quraysh people. They're trying to spread the word of Allah. They're trying to spread the Muslim message, and the Quraysh people aren't buying it. And so some of his disciples came to Muhammad and said, hey, if you could just allow the people to worship those 3 daughters, why, it's going to sell everywhere. Because he'd already condemned all the idols, including the moon god and the moon god's daughters. And so Muhammad said, well, let me go pray about it. So he's always doing this. Let me go pray about that. Let me go pray about this. So he goes and prays, comes back a little while later. Hey, guess what? Allah says it's okay to worship the daughters as well. Yay. And then some of his other disciples come to him afterwards and like, hey, Muhammad, prophet of God, you've told us very clearly that Allah condemns this. And Muhammad says famously, this must have, I'm paraphrasing, but this must have been the devil speaking to me, which is very embarrassing. So the Satanic Verses is an embarrassing thing. That's why Salman Rushdie had a death sentence on him. Because the prophet of God may have been listening to the devil, which we might argue. Not only do I think that's possible, guys, but I think it's possible in other places area, as well. Would you like to look at those places with me? When he says that, Allah is not a father, over and over again, Allah has no son, Allah has no son. He's never a father. Western Jewish tradition. So I do not believe Allah is the God of the Bible. Now, Muslims will often point out that often Arab Christians in the Muslim world will talk about Allah in their translations of the Bible. That's the word they translate for God. And I would respond by saying, of course, people who have been stomped on, who have become dhimmis or second-class citizens in the Muslim world, who are only allowed to do what they want to do if they don't want to die. They have to, keep all these rules for dhimmis, which are very strict depending on the culture. Of course, they're going to bend the knee, as it were, to Islamic tradition. But I tell you this, whenever you pray around the world, if Allah is just the local Arab word for God, which is often the way it's said to us, then why can't you pray to Gottes in German? Or, there's so many other words for God all throughout the world. You can't use any of those names. You must only pray to Allah. So it is very much a local God that's being treated as if it's the God. I don't buy it. There's much more to that argument. I haven't got time. All right. So who are we? They sort of agree with the Bible. It's been changed many times in the Quran itself. Muhammad is always mixing up stories, but we are made in God's image. However, much like early Judaism, Allah would, never allow us to think that God is a man. So mankind is not made in the image of God in any physical way. Mormons, sorry, you're in trouble here. And so, but it's very, very strict in this sense that when Christians, of course, say that Jesus himself, or Isa, as we move into that one, Isa is, in fact, the Son of God, and in fact is the second person of the Trinity. He's God himself, God in human flesh, from Isaiah and so many other passages in the Old Testament of Torah to a Muslim. That's blasphemy. That's shirk, the unforgivable sin of Islam. That requires the death penalty immediately. To associate anything or partnership, anything in the world with Allah. So when Christians say that, that proves that they are unbelievers. That proves they are apostates and blasphemers because we've set up a second God, as it were. And Muslims are taught, because Muhammad said it, because he didn't know what he was talking about, because he had a weird Catholic uncle and who knows what he really got out of that. But They're taught that what Christians teach in the doctrine of the Trinity is that God the Father, Mary the Mother, Jesus the Son. And unfortunately, there are some some thinkers that sound like that sometimes, but even the Catholic Church will say, no, that's not what we're saying. But in the Muslim sense, they believe what Christians believe is that God the Father had a body, had sex with Mary the Mother to produce Jesus, which again is a Mormon, belief. But it is not the Christian belief ever. But because Muhammad said it, Muhammad never makes a mistake, then that's what Muslims say. Since we don't agree with them, then we're lying. That proves why Christians are evil, because we're lying about our own beliefs on the Trinity or something like this. Okay, so let's the rest of it, who Isa is. Isa, Jesus, is considered the second person of the Trinity. Slap. Excuse me, Muslim. Isa is considered the second highest prophet in the Islamic tradition. There are 144 or 140,000, I can't remember which one it is. 140,000 prophets, I believe. Everybody in the Bible basically is a prophet, except for the Apostle Paul. Paul is the most evil person on the planet. He corrupted the Bible. Tarif, he just destroyed the whole thing. Yeah, he's a bad guy, according to many Muslims. But everybody else is a prophet, which is really important sometimes when you're quoting Isaiah or you're quoting other verses in the Torah, the Tarif, whatever Muslims want to call it too. You're quoting the verses from somebody they say they believe is a prophet. Oh, Isaiah's a prophet. Was he a prophet when he said that this child shall be called Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace?
Oh, no, that's a miss.
Yeah, but anyways, you get the point here, is that Jesus is considered the second highest prophet. They love Mary. Miriam is one of the more popular names in the Muslim world. They admit that Jesus was born sinless. They believe in the virgin birth. Jesus committed many, many miracles that the Bible talks about. In fact, Jesus is just full of miraculous things, and Muhammad didn't do any of these things. And about 150 years after the fact, in the Hadith, all of a sudden Muhammad's pulling off miracles, flying to the far city, the city, the Aqsa Mosque, which did exist during Muhammad's lifetime. But he's flying to the city, the mosque there, slashing the moon, creating a crescent moon with a sword, doing all these different things, none of which is in the Quran. But you can imagine Christian apologists of the day saying, dude, why should we consider Jesus the second highest prophet when he's doing all these things, raising people from the dead? They even admit that Muhammad never did. So that's one of the reasons why there's all these later claims of Muhammad's miracles, but they don't exist in the Quran. So Jesus is very important. I've had many Muslims tell me that I'm a better Christian than you are, because I would never say, ever say,
Bill?
that Jesus is in fact the Son of God. That's such a blasphemy. I would never say anything like that. And it's very common. You can see this on the videos that David Wood and others posted. Muslims are out there arguing, where does Jesus say, I am God, worship me? In those words. And if it doesn't say in those words, then I'm sorry, we don't have to accept this claim that Jesus is God. Of course, the Bible refers to Jesus as God in the Old Testament. It refers to him in the New Testament. The early church believed that Jesus was God all the way to this moment. It's what the church is always.
Bill?
Yeah.
Yusuf points out, he said that Isa is a creator in the Quran as well.
I'm interested, Yusuf, is a creator or the creator?
Is a creator in the Quran as well, he says.
No, I see the statement, but is he responding to that? He's saying it is a creator?
Well, that's how he wrote it. So Yusuf is...
That's why I was wondering what he meant by that, because Muslims will say that Allah is the creator of the Bible. He's the creator of the world, just like the Bible says Yahweh is. So when it says, we say Jesus is creator because he's part of the Trinity, Muslims deny that. So I'm curious, because Jesus did miracles, so he's a creator in a very real sense. I'll buy that for sure. And that many Muslims will accept that. Jesus is put on a very high platform. As long as you don't believe he died for your sins, as long as you don't believe he's crucified, and as long as you don't believe he is resurrected. And the typical Muslim claim is that Allah would never, ever allow any of his prophets, to die so horribly. But of course, that all you do, you can point out the story of Isaiah, who was a prophet of God, according to them, and what happened to him, and so many others. And one of the reasons why Muslims don't like to talk about the fact that he was poisoned slowly over several days before he died, horribly death, Well, what if Allah would never allow somebody to die? What happened to Muhammad himself? That's another problem with the argument. Okay, so racing through, that's basically most of our catch-up time. Now we get to the judgment. Again, as I mentioned a little while ago, this is so important. It's so radically important for Muslims. The idea that Allah is going to judge us someday. And as you pointed out earlier, Jeff, we're getting back to that now. With what do I stand before Allah? And depending on the version of the story, there's stories about two angels or sometimes jinns, depending on the story, that are on your shoulders. And one's job is to respond and tell how you followed the hadith, not the obligations. How well, oh man, he was always doing his prayers. He was always, he did the Hajj. He's doing all the good things. Whereas the other one, jinn or angel or whatever we want to call it, is recounting all his sins. Oh Allah, he didn't get up for his prayers. He was always drunk on Thursdays, recounting all of his different sins. And so what's happening up here, and you can almost see Catholics, because this is kind of a human issue I see in a lot of religions. Up there with Allah has a scale. And if you kept the pillars better than you didn't keep them, then maybe you gain paradise. The problem is, of course, is that you don't know. You can never know. Like many of you have talked to Catholics, the same phenomenon exists there. How much, if I have to do good works, Mormons, we just hit all these Restoration Mormons 2 weeks ago, they don't know either. How many good works do I have to do to pull this off? So grace is let out the window, It's literally dependent on my works, my ability, in this case, to keep the pillars. And if I don't do it, if I do it, I really keep the pillars, and I still don't know, because there's that silly thing in the hadith. Allah send me to hell anyways. So they're in trouble. They have no atonement, and they have no sense of that, which is something very important for us as we talk about how we reach out to our Muslim friends, our neighbors, coworkers, people we're just talking to, on how we understand this. So the judgment is really critical. Why? Because paradise and hell are so radically opposite. So we'll get to talking to Muslims in a little bit, but in this case, what is paradise? I've been reading this interesting article. Can't read as much as I used to, but I've been reading this interesting article about Islam. This female scholar, it's very interesting, and maybe some of you have seen it already, but her major argument, and I'm not sure I buy all of it, but there's something to it, is that Islam has no spiritual component. That is truly a earthly, material sense to it. Why? Because what you get in life, if you don't die, and you're in battle, you're fighting in Shahad against the infidel, and you win, well, you get sex slaves, and you get stuff, and you get more land, and you get stuff, and then you get more stuff. You build up your stuff and build up your own little,
empire
treasury box.
Yeah,
and you get all the women. It says that your right hand possesses, famous Arabic phrase for you own them. All right. Well, that's this earth. So that's what happens if I don't die. What happens if I do die and Allah grants me paradise? Well, that's exactly what paradise is like. I'm with perpetual sex slaves throughout eternity. It sounds like the 7th century life of a sheik. There's slaves who are fanning me. There's somebody feeding me grapes or dates. There's these houris, who are these women who are basically the doe-eyed ones, is what it calls them. Scandalously, there's also several stories about little boys that are there as well. And they're there. I told you guys before that the houris are permanent virgins. Every time you have sex with them, the next time you come back to your 72 virgins, they're virgins again, which I think tells you something about who Muhammad was himself, what he did to his own wife, all this kind of stuff. Anyways, this is a terrible story, but it's what Muslims dream of. It's what they're passionate for. So when this lady says it's an earthly religion, I'm like, I kind of see it. I kind of see her point here, that what you're going to gain in heaven is so similar to what you wanted here on earth.
right,
And what you're
right.
gaining through battle and stuff like this. It's this very, it's a man's religion. It's horrible. And so I think we did the math before. I can't remember what we talked about already, but you get 72 virgins if you die, and then Allah grants you paradise. Perpetual virgins forever, right? But 2/3 of hell, which we switch into hell here for a second, 2/3 of hell is filled with women. Muhammad said that himself. So, doing the math here, this is really problematic. Many women are there.
Yeah.
There's arguments amongst Muslims that are the houris the ones that are in paradise, are they the faithful women of Islam? Whereas all the gossips, these are the bad women in Islam. And, oh, by the way, all the Jewish, Christian, and pagan women or something.
Right.
They have all these discussions trying to make sense out of this themselves. So what is hell? It's somewhat similar to the Jewish and Christian tradition in that it's a place of perpetual fire and burning and awful. So you desperately do not want to go to hell. And you desperately want to go to paradise. You want to gain what every 7th century sheikh, lived on, your own personal harem, your harem, we say in English, your harem, that are just all these women who do nothing but sexually satisfy you throughout eternity. That's the picture.
Yeah, that is funny, Bill, what you were saying. It's earthly, right? It's like the God of the Bible talks about these amazing spiritual blessings, and their God is so small he can only offer all these fleshly blessings. Well, that's not even, in the spirit. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Well, Jeff, that's why I think this lady's point is pretty serious. This is that, and also I would argue that this is one of the reasons why it spreads. I would argue that this is the same reason why Mormonism spread early on, is when you're promising men all the women you want. Well, that's bitch.
You got me there. Yep.
And
that's as good as it gets in heaven. It's the same as it is here. Yeah.
There's so many bad jokes I can tell you right now.
But what do the women get?
This is going to be in public record. I do not want.
They get all these awful men.
Remember one for later.
Oh yeah.
Back to Terry, what I said about women. So I'm not going to touch this one. But the point
Hey,
is,
John asked the question: what the women get?
well, again, you're not much of a citizen here, and you're definitely not much of a citizen there either. There's all these things. In fact, I think I told you guys about this, but I have them here with me, a bunch of them. So at the Atheist Convention, I've gone to the Atheist Convention 4 years in a row now. And when the first time I walked in, there's so many anti-Christian symbols, upside down crosses and Baphomets, blah, 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 everywhere. And I asked this one guy, I said, oh, wow, you guys are really ripping on Christians. Now do Islam. And he's like, oh, well, it's cultural, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, nice try, pal. Anyways, this is the first year that there was a table there at the Atheist Convention, the first year I've seen anyways, where all these little pictures and tracts were put out on the table, quite a few of them. And they're all very anti-Islam, all written from a woman's perspective. And I can't put them on the screen like that, but you can actually read them. But they're all very, very aggressively attacking Islam. I also noticed there was nobody at the table ever throughout the entire weekend. All these things were out
they
there.
They didn't want to have to defend them.
Yeah.
Or get found and somebody come and do harm to them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's one. Here's a guy. Here's a skeleton with a glass of wine on a couch. Okay, you see him. And it says, "Waiting for women to wake up and smell the patriarchy, misogyny, and sexism in Islam." It's like, okay, so it's written obviously by very, very ex-Muslim women. I think most of them are
probably,
and very aggressively attacking, because the role of women is horrible in this life.
Sure.
Part of Sharia, just one of the more notorious parts of Sharia. There's all sorts of Sharia, depends on where you go, but there are silly rules. Like, for example, if a Jew is riding on a horse down a street, so this is old-fashioned Sharia, right? And a Muslim's walking by, say nearby that where the Jew is on the horse, the Jew must get off the horse, because no Jew is ever be allowed to be above a Muslim. That's Sharia law. That's Allah's law. You must follow this. Or Christian or anybody else is above, all this kind of stuff. Well, that's trivial in a way, but it's still bad. But anyways, paying the jizya, paying a special tax depending on who the Muslim emperor is. You have to pay the jizya to keep your Jewish faith, keep your Christian faith, but might be 50% of your income. Who knows? Just depends on the sheep. Hold on, Jeff. One more point. Probably the worst part of this is that according to the Sharia law, a woman must have 4 male witnesses to accuse a man of rape. 4 male witnesses.
There goes that out the window.
Historically, is imagine a scenario where a woman's going to have 4 men who are going to stand up and say, yes, those guys were raping her. 1, you might say, why aren't they stopping them if these men are there? 2, why don't the men report them to the authorities or anything? They do nothing. They're just witnesses. Okay. And so what are the odds of that ever happening? And what's worse, if the woman gets raped and she's impregnated and she's pregnant and she's not married, she gets killed. She's committed adultery. She gets to be dead now. So it's a double-edged, terrible sword for women in Islam.
Yeah.
And, what if I only have 3 witnesses? No, I'm sorry. That doesn't qualify. It's horrible. I think the role of women. Of course, you'll never hear that in the Western press. Oh, no, women in Islam are treated wonderfully. I heard that at the Parliament of World Religions 2 years ago. There was a booth, spreading Islam and Dawah, evangelizing. And oh, no, women are treated well. That's a Western lie by those Jews and Christians, Women are treated so well. It's such a blessing to be a Muslim, a Muslim woman or stuff like this. Whereas all you have to do is read the Quran and Sharia law itself and the Hadith, and you realize women are in a bad place. You could bring up slavery. You can bring up so many other issues. Muslims have convinced the West that they're against slavery and they're against the patriarchy. They're for women's rights. And this is all
That's part of the deception.
It is.
So going back to the women needing 4 witnesses to accuse a man of rape, I was once talking to I think it was a Muslim girl. I'm not entirely sure. The commenter was anonymous. And this person was basically saying that Israel is like the rape capital of the Middle East or something, which I haven't really researched that a whole lot, but I don't think that's true. But I also have to wonder, if it is, how much of that do you think could be attributed to more rights for women in Israel versus Middle Eastern countries that practice Sharia? So basically preventing women from being able to report a rape.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, Morgan, because, if you want a rape capital, go to Amsterdam, go to Hamburg, go to parts of London, go to Cairo, go to places where if you're not dressed properly, and sometimes even if you are, you can get raped. And part of why Islam say we honor women, we dress them in, up so much once they've hit puberty or something like this. But that has not stopped them from being raped. And this is often throughout the Western world. And there are examples in the Hadith itself where they've just slaughtered a village, killed all the men. Muhammad, can you please ask Allah? I think I told you guys this, but can you please ask Allah, how long do we have to wait, before we can have, sex with their wives of all the men we just killed? And so Muhammad goes and prays. Oh, he says he can do this. Oh, great, thank you. And off we go. Even Aisha makes this interesting statement about this type of thing. Aisha made this comment that, wow, Muhammad, I'm paraphrasing, Allah seems to always give you what you want. So Morgan, I think it's a fairy tale that Israel is the rape capital of the world, but it sells well in the West because the hatred of the Jews is historic. And as we see in so many circles, and even in our own Congress and universities, and in New York City for that matter, hatred of the Jews goes way, way back. What is the battle cry of so many people, including the Democratic Socialist guy running for mayor of New York? Globalize the Intifada. We got to spread the will of Allah, spread Sharia law by fighting. And that's there's nothing new about that. That's historic. And how we treat women. And I was watching a woman, professor at the University of Cairo, of all places, so the top Muslim university in the world. And she was talking about, and they were translating it on memory.org, she was talking about the fact that, we've got a problem in the Muslim world. Too many women are getting raped. What we need to do is go back to old school, go back to Muhammad's day, back to the police, and go get the Jewish women and the Christian women like we used to do.
Nice.
There, lady.
Wow.
So I had a question about the after. You were talking about their afterlife. What do they call it? And do they represent that there's going to be peace there? Because if there's all these women and all this sex going on, you would think one man is going to find another man's woman attractive. But so what are they? I mean, there's going to be trouble. You know that, right? I mean, it's like,
okay, Jeff. Again,
is there going to be peace there? That's the question. And what do they call it?
72 of your own.
Yeah.
It's never enough, Bill. You know that.
You won't have time.
It's not a
question. Do you expect me to ask a logical question about their? It is again. what many people have pointed out. It's what a 7th century sheikh would have wanted in his life. He paints that picture for a bunch of Arabs. This is what their sheikhs lived like, and everybody wants to be like the rich guy to this moment, right? Everybody wants to live the life of Jeff Bezos or whoever else. Well, that's certainly true in the Arabic world as well. And so here's the sheikhs who are by birth blessed with all this riches and women and everything like that. And yet this is the goal. You'll get this. You'll get what I have. Look at the.
But there's no talk of like
what I have.
perfect righteousness and peace. None of that. There's no talk of representing that.
Because once the whole world is subjugated to the will of Allah, then everybody will be part of the Dar al-Islam, which will bring about peace. That's the way they reason this. But the problem is that those Jews and Christians and other nations aren't cooperating with this, and so we have to fight them to bring them under the will of Allah. But the claim is that peace will come when all the world has become Muslim. But all you have to do is, again, know Muslim history to realize how false that is, because Muslims have been killing each other since the early days of some of the caliphs and, throughout the Umayyads and all the different Muslim empires of the world past. Just like everybody else in the world, people in the Muslim world want power. But many do. And guess what? There's fighting. And to this moment, there's always a new caliph. Always. And, so Israel yesterday, it says, finally killed the mastermind behind the October 7th attack. Well, you know what? There's always another junior mastermind who's now elevated to the mastermind.
They just pop up like weeds.
Yeah.
Even in their afterworld, it's not like our heaven.
No,
right?
It's not like heaven at all. But again, the conception is that paradise is what this world should be like for a good Muslim today.
Forever.
It'll be like paradise forever. And
there's going to be war. There'll still be war because it seems like that.
No,
I'm just telling you what they believe, Jeff. There's not going to be any war because you have everything you want will be satisfied to you. Right. That's why it's important that the little boys are there. And I've been watching David Wood, and I had not heard this until recently. David Wood and these other guys are bringing up some of these interesting discussions from the Sharia and everything like this about all sorts of what looks like, shall we just say it bluntly, homosexual encounters that Muhammad himself is having. And it points to all sorts of, I'm not going to go into the discussion right now, but it just points to all sorts of things. Where do these little boys come? We'll go to Afghanistan right now. Yeah. You see this fascination with the little boys that are dressed like girls over there.
It's disgusting. John's coworker has shared stories with us. He's military. And
one of my coworkers did a couple of tours in Afghanistan, and they hated their interpreters because they all had their little boys that, they were ordered to turn the blind eye to. Right? Sorry, what's that?
I said, and yet somehow Islam is against homosexuality.
Yeah, doesn't make sense.
They're not. No, they're not. There's a version in the Qur'an that I was reading where basically it was talking kind of about homosexuality. And it was basically saying, like, and I'm paraphrasing, if you catch a guy, being homosexual or whatever with another guy, then basically they get a slap on the wrist. You're supposed to treat them with love and compassion and stuff. If you catch a girl, acting like a lesbian or whatever, then she's basically locked up in her house for life. And it's like, wow, Momo's giving himself a get-out-free card. Get out, but I think you know what you're doing.
It's not a pretty picture for women ever. And again, I would make a parallel here to Mormon women who are perpetually pregnant throughout his eternity. You're going to be pregnant forever so you can have babies to populate your planet.
What a life.
It's all about sex again, and the Muslim conception of heaven is paradise now. It's basically all about sex.
Man's perversions.
You take every fallen man's worst things about us and then you glorify it and say this is what Allah wants.
Or paradise,
Our tendency towards violence, our tendency towards perverse sex or whatever, our tendency towards greed. It basically takes all those things and writes us into paradise.
Yeah. What I have often wondered is, why is there such a thing as a devout Muslim woman?
I know.
There are a lot of them that are very devout, but why? Is it like the most massive Stockholm syndrome?
No,
it doesn't make any sense.
No, and I actually was familiar when I was with the Conservative Baptist Missions many years ago. There was a terrible story about one of the missionaries that our church was a big supporter of in the Denver area, and they were having marital problems. This couple, they were in Pakistan. The mission sent them back home to get their act together and work on their marriage. After they got home, the women convinced the mission people that, hey, look, I burned some bridges. I need to go back and apologize, you know. And the mission flew her back. And once there, she renounced her faith, declared, you know, Shahada, and married this guy she was having an affair with. Okay. And so part of my thinking about this, Don, is the very same thing. She knows what life in the West is like. And since she's been in Pakistan, she also knows what life for women is like there. How the heck do you pull that off in your head? I think it's a great question, this cognitive dissonance of the highest order. But part of the sensibility in my trying to understand this kind of question, my sense of the fact that Allah we're meat puppets for Allah. So it was Allah's will that I be a woman. I can't fight that. It's Allah's will that I be subservient. It's Allah's will that my testimony courts, you know, next half as much as a man. It's Allah's will that for men, you know, that you can rape me basically and get away with it all day long, which has happened all over the Muslim world. It's Allah's will that all these things happen. So it's kind of like the woman's role is to submit themselves even more to demands, because it's going to be bad for you.
It's built into the system, it seems.
Yeah.
Well, there's joy in obedience, right?
Yeah.
Depends on who you are obeying there, Jeff.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, we are about at the end of the time here. So if there's any quick questions. Pardon?
Are you serious? There's so much more to do.
Yeah, well, you'll have to do it quickly next week.
Yeah. Slave driver, man. The time that get is
talk about Sharia.
No kidding.
Hey, Bill knows that about me. That's why he tries to not look at where I'm at in case I'm doing something like stop.
Oh.
That happens when I speak in churches too, so I ignore them as well.
Well, I do have one quick question. So when they die, do they go to a spiritual place, or is it just back? You know what I mean? Is there an actual afterlife, or are they just reborn back here? I'm kind of unclear on that.
They are not here. They're somewhere else. I've never heard a Muslim theologian talk about a place like here or something like this. It's not like they're moving to the dark side of the moon or something. It's somewhere else where it looks like paradise earth, but it's paradise earth from the sheiks, the 6th, 7th century sheiks, you know, perspective.
Okay, so they don't talk much about it. They don't paint much of a picture. That's good. All right, thanks.
It's almost like the Viking
with it, Jeff. The point is to obey. Submit.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the details.
It's almost like a Valhalla type, isn't it?
Well, but the Baha'i are a spinoff of.
No. Like Valhalla, like the Viking afterlife, like the Viking paradise.
Makes it hard to.
It is a heavenly version of the Norse
of the earth,
world where you sit in, you sit amongst the fjords, you drink and kill people.
Yeah, exactly. Very similar.
Hard to think on things above that are very pleasing. Maybe I don't know.
Well, I think that's why this woman's argument is a very serious one. Is that this is a very earthly religion.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Okay. Well, we're going to end the stream and see you all next week, 8 o'clock Central on Tuesday.
Yes.